Have you ever stopped to think about, really think about, how incredible your brain is, how it adapts and learns, basically changing every single day?
It's something we definitely take for granted, isn't it?
Yes.
Constantly
Yeah.
working away in the background.
Exactly. And today, we're diving into something truly fascinating. This capacity for change, neuroplasticity, especially how it connects with, well, music, which is everywhere.
Absolutely. Music seems to tap into something really fundamental in our brains.
We've looked at some really interesting stuff for this chat, a great TEDx talk from a brain researcher, insights from other scientists, and studies on how music hits our memory, our focus, even our ability to heal.
Yeah, the research is quite compelling.
Our goal here is really to unpack some maybe surprising things about how our brains work and how everyday things, like listening to a song, are constantly shaping who we are.
So let's get into this connection between your brain and sound. It's a fascinating area.
Okay, so maybe we should start with how much our understanding has changed. For a long time, there were these pretty big misconceptions about the brain, right?
Oh, definitely. Huge ones.
Like, I remember hearing that after you're a kid, your brain's pretty much set in stone. Or if it did change, it was only downhill, losing cells as you got older.
That was the dominant view for a very long time. But it couldn't be further from the truth. We now know the brain is incredibly active, even when you're just, sitting quietly.
Right.
And the real revolution in thinking came with this idea that every time you learn something new, a fact, a skill, anything, you are physically changing your brain.
And that's neuroplasticity.
That's neuroplasticity.
Yeah.
It's this fundamental ability of the brain to reorganize itself. And it's not just for kids. It happens throughout our entire lives. It's even the basis for how we can recover function after, say, a brain injury or a stroke.
Wow. So how does it actually do that? What's changing in there?
Well, it's happening in a few key ways, often all at once. First, you've got chemical changes. Think of your brain cells, neurons, talking to each other, using chemical signals, neurotransmitters.
Yeah.
Learning can cause a rapid temporary boost in these signals between specific neurons. It's like turning up the volume on their conversation.
So that helps with short-term stuff.
Exactly. Short-term memory, or that feeling when you practice something new, like maybe a piece on the piano, and you get noticeably better just within that one session.
Yeah, definitely had that. Then the next day it's like, gone.
Right. That initial improvement is often down to those quick chemical changes. They boost performance right then, but they haven't necessarily built a lasting pathway yet.
So what does build the lasting pathway?
That leads us to the second type, structural changes. This is where the actual physical connections between neurons change. New connections can form, existing ones can get stronger, or weaker ones might prune away.
That sounds like it would take longer.
It does take more time and effort, yeah. It's about physically rewiring. But this is what underpins long-term memory and really mastering a skill.
Are there visible examples of this?
Oh, absolutely. Really clear ones. Think about Braille readers. The area of their brain processing touch information from their reading finger actually gets larger.
Wow.
Or the classic example, London taxi drivers. Before GPS, they had to memorize thousands of streets, this incredibly complex map called the knowledge.
I've heard about that. Sounds intense.
It is. And studies showed that the part of their brain responsible for spatial memory, the hippocampus, was significantly larger compared to control groups. Their brains physically changed to accommodate that massive learning task. Even something simple like your dominant hand, the motor region controlling it, is slightly larger.
So experience is literally sculpting the brain.
Precisely. And the third type is functional changes. This is about how entire networks of brain activity shift and become more efficient as you learn. As you use a specific brain region or pathway more, it becomes sort of more excitable, easier to activate again.
Like wearing a path in a field.
That's a great analogy. The more you use it, the easier it is to travel that path. Entire brain networks reorganize how they fire together. And the amazing thing is, these chemical, structural, and functional changes are usually happening together all across the brain all the time.
It's kind of mind-blowing that this is constantly happening. But okay, here's the thing. If our brains are so amazingly plastic, why isn't learning always easy? Why do we hit plateaus or struggle?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And brings us to what actually drives these changes. The single most important factor, the thing that makes plasticity happen, is your behavior.
Not some magic pill or brain game.
Nope. There's no neuroplasticity drug. You have to do the work. Practice is key. But it's not just any practice.
What do you mean?
Well, research, especially looking at recovery after injuries, shows that struggling, Facing difficulty during practice actually leads to more significant learning and bigger structural changes in the brain.
So when it feels hard, that's actually good.
In many ways, yes. That effort signals to your brain that this is important, that it needs to adapt. Think about learning a language. Just listening passively is okay, but really trying to speak, making mistakes, forcing your brain to work harder. That's where the real rewiring happens.
That makes sense. I guess it also explains why just reading about exercise doesn't make you fit.
Exactly. You have to do the exercise. And it's important to remember, plasticity isn't always positive.
How so?
It's a two-way street. The same mechanisms that let us learn new skills also underlie things like forgetting information we don't use, developing addictions, or even how chronic pain pathways can become ingrained and hypersensitive.
So what we do and what we don't do both shape our brain.
Constantly, which also highlights why there's no single recipe for learning, that whole 10,000 hours idea. It's a catchy simplification.
Right, I've always wondered about that.
Brains are just too unique. What works brilliantly for one person might not for another. It depends on your existing brain structure, your learning style, your motivation. This is pushing towards the idea of more personalized learning.
So the advice is really to figure out what works for you.
Yes. Pay attention to how you learn best. Repeat the behaviors that build the skills or knowledge you want. Consciously work to break patterns or habits you don't want. Practice. Learning really is about doing the specific work your brain requires.
It really changes how you look at, well, everything you do during the day, knowing you're actively building your brain.
It does.
Okay, so let's pivot slightly. Let's talk about music. It seems to be this universal thing. Every culture has music. Why? How does something that doesn't directly, feed us or clothe us have such a hold on us?
That's a deep question, and neuroscience is giving us some fascinating clues. Music plugs directly into our emotional and memory systems in really powerful ways.
Like how a certain song can just instantly take you back somewhere.
Exactly. That's memory magic right there.
Yeah.
Music is incredibly effective at evoking memories, sometimes ones you thought were long forgotten. It activates brain areas like the hippocampus and prefrontal cortex, key hubs for memory and emotion.
So songs act like triggers.
You could think of them as auditory Post-it notes, yeah. They help us retrieve old memories and even lay down new ones more effectively. And this is profoundly important in conditions like dementia.
How so?
Well, even when dementia severely impairs other types of memory, musical memory often remains surprisingly intact. Playing familiar music for someone with dementia can unlock communication, spark recognition, and just bring moments of joy and connection. It's incredibly moving to see.
That's amazing. What about the emotional side? Why does music make us feel so much?
It directly fiddles with the dials in our brain's emotional control centers. Listening to music you enjoy triggers the release of dopamine, the brain's reward chemical. That's the pleasure hit.
Okay, that explains why we like it. But what about sad music? People listen to that too.
Right, and that's interesting too. Sad music can actually be quite comforting or cathartic. It can trigger the release of prolactin, a hormone associated with soothing and consolation. It allows us to process sadness in a safe way.
And what about that feeling, the chills, goosebumps you get from a piece of music?
Frisson. Yeah, this is a fascinating neurological response. It seems to involve the auditory cortex connecting directly with really old, deep parts of the brain, sometimes called the reptilian brain, linked to core emotional and survival responses.
So it's like a safe kind of thrill.
Kind of. It triggers a strong emotional, almost arousal-like response, but because we know we're safe, we interpret it as intensely pleasurable. It's a powerful reminder of how deeply music can reach into our core programming.
And you mentioned music binding people together.
Yes, absolutely. Group music making, singing in a choir, playing in a band, even just attending a concert together has measurable social effects. It boosts oxytocin, the bonding hormone.
The cuddle hormone.
That's the one. It also lowers stress hormones like cortisol and can even decrease pain sensitivity. It functions like a powerful social communication system, fostering connection and well-being. It's not just slough. It's biology.
So music isn't just entertainment, it can be therapeutic, which people seem to have known for ages, right?
For millennia, ancient Egyptians, Greeks, they used music for healing. Even during World War II, music therapy was used pretty extensively to help soldiers deal with physical and psychological trauma. Modern science is now just catching up and explaining why it works.
So what are some modern examples? How is music used as, medicine today?
Well, one really strong area is movement recovery. Music seems to prime the brain for movement. There was a study back in the 90s.
Okay.
Stroke patients who had weakness on one side walked to the rhythm of Renaissance dance music. They showed immediate improvements in how their muscles fired and how evenly they walked. And crucially, those benefits lasted even 6 months after the therapy stopped.
Wow, it's just from walking to music.
The rhythm provides an external cue that helps organize the motor commands. It's also been shown to help people with Parkinson's disease walk faster and overcome those freezing moments where they suddenly can't move. Often, music therapy worked better than standard physical therapy for these specific movement issues.
That's incredible. What about other areas like language?
Also, huge potential there. Take aphasia. That's when someone loses the ability to speak or understand language, often after a stroke affecting the left side of the brain, which is typically language dominant.
Right.
But music processing involves both sides of the brain. So, fascinatingly, people with severe aphasia who can't speak a single word might still be able to sing words.
Really?
Yes. And there's a therapy based on this called melodic intonation therapy, or MIT. It essentially uses the singing ability,
Yeah.
often housed in the undamaged right hemisphere, to coax it into taking over some of the lost language functions. You're literally using melody and rhythm to rewire the brain for speech.
That's amazing neuroplasticity in action.
Exactly. And it's also used for cognitive issues after traumatic brain injury problems with attention, concentration, memory, even social behavior. Music therapy provides structured, engaging ways to retrain those functions.
Okay, so listening to music and specific therapies are powerful. What about playing music? You hear people say it's like a workout for the brain. Is that accurate?
It's a very good analogy, actually. Playing an instrument is one of the most complex activities you can ask your brain to do. It engages almost everything at once.
Like what?
You've got visual processing, reading music, auditory processing, listening to yourself and others, fine motor control. It requires integrating information across multiple senses and translating it into precise physical actions, all in real time,
So it's using lots of different parts of the brain.
all talking to each other intensely. It uniquely combines the logical, sequential processing often associated with the left hemisphere with the more creative, novel processing of the right hemisphere.
Does that have measurable effects?
It does. For instance, musicians tend to have a larger, more active corpus callosum.
That's the bridge between the two halves of the brain.
Exactly. A thicker, faster bridge means potentially better communication between the hemispheres, which could lead to more efficient thinking and perhaps more creative problem solving, drawing on both logical and intuitive strengths.
And does it help kids?
Research suggests yes. Children who learn an instrument often show faster development in reading skills and sometimes exhibit fewer behavioral issues. Plus, there's evidence that musical training enhances memory. Musicians often outperform non-musicians on various short-term memory tasks.
So basically, learning an instrument is pretty good for your brain across the board.
It seems to be a fantastic way to promote broad cognitive health and plasticity, yes.
Okay, makes me wish I'd stuck with those piano lessons. But let's get practical for a lot of listeners. The common question: is listening to music helpful when you're trying to study or work?
The background music debate.
Yeah, you see those lo-fi beats for studying playlists everywhere, but then some people need total silence. What's the real story?
The research here is, well, it's a bit nuanced, but there are some clear trends. The most consistent finding is that music with lyrics generally makes cognitive performance worse.
Worse. Even if you like the music.
Yes, especially for tasks involving language reading comprehension, remembering verbal information. It seems to trigger something called the irrelevant speech effect,
Meaning?
meaning your brain can't help but try and process the words it's hearing, even if you're trying to ignore them. That processing interferes with the main task you're trying to focus on, like reading or writing. It divides your attention.
Okay, so lyrics are generally bad for focus. What about instrumental music? No words.
That's much less disruptive. The results there are more mixed. Some studies find little to no effect, positive or negative. Others find small potential benefits, maybe for things like reading comprehension. But often these effects aren't super robust or statistically strong. It might depend a lot on the type of music, the volume, the task, and the individual.
And does the type of task matter, like math versus writing?
It seems to. Arithmetic tasks, for example, tend to be less negatively affected by background music, possibly because they rely less on verbal processing compared to reading.
But here's the confusing part. Lots of people feel like music helps them study.
Exactly. And this is a really interesting point. Psychologists call it a metacognitive blind spot. We might enjoy the music, it might make the task feel less boring, so we perceive that we're doing better.
But the objective data might show otherwise.
Often, yes. Especially with lyrical music. People might report feeling more focused or productive, while their actual performance on the task goes down compared to silence. Our subjective feeling isn't always a reliable guide to our actual cognitive performance.
Huh. So my study playlist might actually be hurting my studying.
If it has lyrics, there's a good chance it is, unfortunately, even if you think you're tuning them out.
Okay, so if lyrics are out and instrumental is maybe okay, but maybe not, what should people listen to if they want some background sound for focus, but silence feels too silent?
That's a great question. There are alternatives that research suggests might be more beneficial. Nature sounds are a popular one.
Like birdsong or rain.
Exactly. Sounds like flowing water, gentle rain, birdsong. These tend to promote relaxation and calm the mind without actively competing for your cognitive resources in the same way language does. They can help shift your nervous system towards a more relaxed rest and digest state, which can actually enhance focus for some people.
Interesting. Any other options?
Another one getting attention is binaural beats. Have you heard of those?
Vaguely. It's something with different frequencies in each ear, right?
That's the idea. You listen through headphones to two slightly different frequencies, one in each ear. Your brain perceives this difference as a third, pulsing tone, the binaural beat.
And that helps focus.
Some research suggests it can. The theory is that these beats can gently nudge your brainwave activity towards states associated with relaxation or focus, depending on the frequency difference. Studies have shown potential improvements in cognitive performance and mood. But like instrumental music, the effects can be variable and might not work for everyone.
So the bottom line is kind of experiment.
Pretty much. The best auditory environment is highly individual. What works wonders for one person might be distracting for another. The key is to try different things. Silence, nature sounds, maybe some very simple instrumental music or binaural beats, and honestly assess how they affect your concentration and performance on specific tasks, not just how much you enjoy them.
That makes a lot of sense. This whole conversation has been incredibly illuminating. Just realizing how dynamic our brains are constantly being shaped and seeing how something like music, which feels so intuitive, has these really profound, measurable effects on memory, emotion, healing, focus. It's quite something.
It really underscores that fundamental principle. Everything you do, everything you experience, is actively changing your brain moment by moment, for better or for worse.
Yeah, it's a powerful thought.
It is. And remember, as you leave this conversation, your brain isn't the same one you started with. Listening to this, processing it, that's changed things in there for each of you, uniquely. Understanding that you have this ongoing ability to shape your brain isn't just abstract science. It's really the key to intentionally building the mind you want, not just for learning specific things, but for your whole life.
It really puts the power back in our own hands, doesn't it? Being intentional about what we expose our brains to, including sound and the behaviors we practice.
Precisely. Be mindful of your auditory environment. Be mindful of your actions. You are the primary architect of your brain.
Well, thank you so much for unpacking all of this with us. It's given me, and I hope everyone listening, a lot to think about regarding our amazing brains and the surprising power of music.
My pleasure. It's endlessly fascinating stuff.
Definitely. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. We hope you'll carry these insights with you and maybe experiment a little with how you can best support your own brain's incredible potential.